So Dr. Salman Abu Sitta is best known for his cartographic work on Palestine and his work on the Palestinian right of return. He is the author of 6 books and over 300 articles and papers on Palestine, including the Atlas of Palestine, 1917-1966. You're also the founder and president of the Palestine Land Society. And today you will be speaking about Zionism waged in 10 different kinds of wars against Palestinians. Will it win? What is the likely outcome of 150 years of Zionist colonial history? The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. At last, we defeated the technology which tried to stop us, and now it is time to defeat Zionism. You all know, you are all my friends, and I think you know most of what I'm going to say. Since I have not heard what has been said before, I may be repeating something. So I hope I'm not doing that. Today is the 72nd anniversary of Nakba. Now, we can never get tired of repeating the same thing because it is a unique event. It is the most tragic event in Palestine's 4,000-year history. It's also, in spite of some objections from my friends, it's also the most unique colonial project in the world. Because if you look at it from any point of view, you will see that 560,000 villages have been depopulated through an organized military campaign in which 9 brigades have been participating with 120,000 soldiers operating in 31 military operations. It is really a Zionist invasion in spite of all the propaganda to the contrary. Now, this represents the longest war in history about a people, and it is still continuing. This great tragic event could not have happened without massacres. Massacres were the weapon of ethnic cleansing. There is no question about it. The massacres represent, of course, war crimes. We have listed 365 war crimes by Israel from the period of end of 1947 to 1953. Now, we all know that the record of Israel in war crimes is unique in its barbarity. And we are not talking about a colonial project which happened 200 years ago in many countries, in which people, settlers, came in sailing ships and they carried swords and arrows and lances. We are talking about a project which has taken place in the 20th century, when there is something called United Nations, and when there is something called New York Times and Associated Press. There were cameras and telegram and all that. So actually, it is a planned, deliberate, and continuous invasion of Palestine, which is continuing to today. But it's not only war crimes. It is actually have been helped by a series of deception, which is a very powerful weapon not used in other colonial projects. The first deception was Palestine is a land without people. I often thought, how could Europe accept that when it started in the middle of the 19th century or even before? Because by the end of the 19th century, or certainly by the First World War, Britain has done a great deal of surveys in Palestine where they listed 9,000 names and 26 maps and 10 volumes and so on. The French have produced 8 volumes of description of every village in Palestine. So it couldn't have been a myth misunderstood by ignorant people. It dawned on me after so many years that it's not a myth. It was actually a plan to make Palestine a land without people. It's the first germ of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And now we know it has been carried out completely. The second myth was in Balfour when they say we would like to establish a Jewish home in Palestine. So in Palestine, not of Palestine. And it is a home, it's not a state. And um, now we know in July 2018, if I remember correctly, Netanyahu, I made it very clear that all Palestine doesn't exist. It's Israel, and it's the home of the Jewish people everywhere. I want to bring to your attention something else. In the narrative, Israeli narrative, they said Israel in 1948 was a state of self-defense, meaning that they were defending themselves against the Arab invasion, supposed to be Arab invasion after 15th of May 1948. But actually nobody talks about, or should actually talk about, the Zionist invasion, which preceded that. In the previous 6 months, while the British were in Palestine, well, there was nothing called Israel, and there is no Arab regular soldiers there. The Zionist invasion, called Plan Dalet, depopulated 220 towns and villages on the coast of Palestine completely, and their population make up half of the total refugees today. And then they say that refugees left on their own accord. Well, we have now, and even in the excellent book by Ilan Pape, Ethnic Cleansing, we know there was a series of massacres which has taken place. Then they tell us that, all right, there is no legality in the right of return. But we can tell them there is not a single line in the international law articles which prevents or is against right of return. It's always supporting right of return. Then they tell us that, yes, that's European, friendly Europeans. They say that, yes, of course, but the country now is full, and how could the refugees return? Now, this is an immoral question, and illegal question. If burglars burst into your house, kick people out, kill half of your family, and then you come claim your house, they say, well, the burglar came with his friends and they are now sleeping in your bed, so you can't do it. This is, of course, as I said, immoral and illegal. But even if it is so, we made extensive study, and we have shown that 87% of Israeli Jews live in 12% of Israel area, which is only slightly larger than the land they have occupied during the British Mandate. And if the refugees, all of them return, there would be very minor displacement in a small price, of course, for paying for 72 years of death and destruction of Palestinians. And when you actually examine the history, not the history, the elements, whether geographical, demographic, economic, or legal elements, you do not find a single reason why the refugees could not return home. There is one, of course, reason, namely that Zionism, Zionist racism, and apartheid. And with that existing under any name, under any brand name or any kind of agreement, there will be no return of the Palestinians, and of course there will be no peace. But let me end with a positive note. During this month, I received, like most of you, notices from many tens of groups of youth, Palestinian youth, in many countries, in Europe, in America, and Arab countries everywhere. And those are the third generation, even the fourth generation of refugees who have not forgotten, as Ben Gurion wanted them, and they are now clamoring for a worldwide campaign to return home. To return, they will, no doubt about that. In 2030, Palestinians will be 18 million people. Half of them now are on the soil of Palestine, and the other half is within 100 miles from its borders. So with the world um, as it is now, not very favorable, but the future will definitely be in their favor, and there will be no peace in the area without that. Let me just remind you with one last sentence. Some people tell us it's 72 years since the Nakba. Well, it's about time you forget about Palestine and you have to accept it, as many people who have lost their faith say. Well, I say the opposite. 72 years in which Palestinians have never given up. They have never handed over to Israel the title deed of their country. The Israeli craves for this legitimacy that Palestinians will give them a piece of paper saying, we are not Palestinians, Palestine is your country, and we should go away either in the desert or the sea. This has not happened and will not happen. So I say 72 years of a Nakba means 72 years of steadfastness, 72 years of success of not giving up at all. And Palestinians certainly will not give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I just wanted to ask you, because in a lot of common discourse, there's this almost myth around the feasibility of the right of return. And you've done a lot of work on how the right of return can be implemented practically. Can you say something about your work and your expertise in that context?
Yes, I mentioned this briefly, but I can tell you we have a database of about 6 million Palestinians. We know where they come from, their villages, we know their property, we know their origin, the names of the family. We also know where they are. And with a push of button on the computer, we can identify the person, where he comes from, and in which refugee camp he is today. In fact, we have established a network of roads. How long does it take him to go from Al-Baqa, for example, in Amman to his place? What the routes, how long it takes, how many buses is needed. We also have made a study of how many units have to be built for the returning refugees, their costs, and we can find out easily that they can all be done by Palestinian labor and engineers. It could be phased into 4, 5, 6 years. And not only that, we organize each year an international competition among Palestinian young students graduating in architecture. And we give them a list of selected villages. We ask them to design the reconstruction of the village, which is mostly, sometimes, it's their own village. And they do, and we have international competition announced in London every year. It's judged by international architects from Europe and from Arab countries. And you have no idea how brilliant those young architects are when they actually design their own villages, of course, with 10 times the population of today, and with internet, and with more schools, more hospitals, and all that. It really is so moving to see their image, how they see it. We have even one case, actually more than one case, of a student who actually selected the village of his grandfather, it was actually her grandfather, and rebuilt the house roughly in the same area, but with the new amenities and so on. So we are not only demanding the right of return, we are not dreaming about the right of return. We are planning for it. I am sure when the time comes, the work done by others and so on, accumulated work, will make the return of refugees much easier than Bosnia and other places, and Iraq, and even Afghanistan, and Paraguay, and so on. In all these places, luckily for us, Palestine is very well documented. It was well documented for the sake of settlers to come in. But now we have to reverse the process and make it well documented for the return.
Thank you, Doctor.